I lent my mansion to my sister-in-law for a grand wedding, only to discover it was all a scam to steal the property. When the guests arrived, they were in for a surprise. 48 hours. That's the razor-thin line between having a roof over my head and being completely screwed. Mrs. Reed, I regret to inform you that the final deadline for payment is non-negotiable. The lawyer's voice on the other end of the line was as frigid as the broken air conditioning unit in my makeshift office. My knuckles turned white, my grip on the phone so tight I was surprised the plastic didn't crack. $487,000. The number was so staggering, it felt like something from a game show, a completely unreal figure. There has to be some kind of mistake, I managed to stammer, frantically pulling open the drawers of John's old desk. My husband handled all the finances, but he never said a word about a late mortgage, let alone a series of loans that added up to nearly $500,000. The lawyer cleared his throat, the kind of professional, detached sound people make right before delivering terrible news. Mrs. Reed, according to our files, your late husband was fully aware of the situation. Notices have been sent out regularly for the past 8 months. 8 months? John had been gone for a year. He knew. He knew all along and never told me a thing. The phone slipped from my hand as my knees gave out. I sank into the leather office chair, which still held the faint, lingering scent of John's cologne. This house, our sanctuary on the shores of Lake Lanier, now felt less like a paradise and more like a beautifully crafted trap. It was a gift from my grandparents. 3 generations of my family had grown up within these walls, walls made of cedar that creaked and groaned with the Georgia wind. How could John have gambled it away? And how could I have been so blind? A wave of panic began to rise in my chest, that suffocating feeling that your entire world is collapsing in slow motion and you're powerless to stop it. My eyes drifted to the framed photo of my grandparents on the wall. My grandmother in her floral summer dress, my grandfather in his fishing hat, both beaming in front of the newly built house. "I'm not going to lose you," I whispered to the house, as if it could somehow hear me. That's when my gaze fell upon a small, shimmering gold envelope tucked into the corner of the desk blotter. It was an elegant invitation with ornate, looping script. Harrison and Victoria invite you to celebrate their wedding. Here, at my house, in 2 days. My sister-in-law was busy planning the social event of the season while my life was imploding. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so utterly devastating. Watching Victoria hand-deliver those golden invitations around the neighborhood was like witnessing a parade of pure entitlement. There she was, dressed to the nines at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday, her stiletto heels sinking into the damp lawn, her hair perfectly blown out. She was personally ensuring the most influential neighbors received their summons. "It's going to be the event of the season," I overheard her telling the wife of the head of the homeowners association, who was practically drooling over the pearlescent cardstock. I was hiding behind the living room curtain, feeling like a spy in my own home. "Maddie, darling, I thought you'd be in the city today," Victoria called out with feigned surprise when she finally spotted me on the porch. Her smile was a perfect, polished veneer, but it never quite reached her eyes, at least not when she was looking at me. "Just handling the last-minute details. The decorators are arriving first thing in the morning." She spoke as if the house was already hers, as if I were merely a guest who had overstayed her welcome. It was astonishing how, in the year since John's death, Victoria had so seamlessly stepped into the role of Lady of the Manor. It's just a simple, intimate wedding. Only 300 people. 300? That was more than the population of some small towns. I remember the exact day she came to me with her brilliant idea to get married here. It was 3 months after the funeral, a time when I was still finding John's socks in random corners and crying myself to sleep clutching them. It would be so meaningful, Maddie. John would have loved to see the house filled with life again. She'd even managed to produce tears, crocodile tears, I realized now. Back then, lost in my grief, I'd agreed instantly, grateful for the distraction, for a chance to fill the suffocating silence with laughter instead of echoes. What a fool I'd been. While I was mourning my husband, my dear sister-in-law was already plotting her takeover. "Harrison is just so excited," Victoria continued, twisting the enormous diamond on her finger to make sure the sun caught it just right. Harrison Montgomery III, the Atlanta tech mogul, 15 years her senior and owner of half the commercial real estate downtown. The kind of man who acquires companies before his morning coffee. He absolutely adores this place. He thinks it has... What was the phrase he used? Oh, right. Untapped potential. The knowing smirk she gave as she said those words made my stomach drop. This was never about family sentiment. It was about location, property value, and a spectacular lakefront view that would be worth millions after a few necessary renovations. It was nearly midnight when I found the folder. I was tearing through John's office for the third time, desperate for anything, a misplaced document, a forgotten savings account that could explain how we'd gotten to this point. Tucked away behind his bookshelf, the one he always told me not to touch because the books were in a very specific order, I discovered a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a single red folder with the bank's logo on it. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped half the papers on the floor. Mortgage agreements, loan applications, promissory notes, and on every single one, there wasn't just John's signature. There was Victoria's right next to it as the guarantor. "This can't be real," I muttered, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into a sickeningly clear picture. The date on the first loan was from 3 years ago, right around the time I had started begging him to cut back on our spending. John had always brushed me off, telling me not to worry, that his business was thriving. It was all a lie. My wonderful husband was secretly leveraging our home, likely to cover his gambling debts. And Victoria knew. She knew the entire time. Tucked between the financial documents was a handwritten letter from him to my sister-in-law. "V, I just need more time. I can't tell her yet. She'll leave me. You get it, you always have. Only you." A knot of ice formed in my throat. What kind of relationship did they truly have? The final, brutal blow came from the last few pages, a preliminary contract of sale. It showed that Victoria and Harrison had a plan in place to purchase my home from the bank the moment it went into foreclosure for a mere 30% of its market value, for pennies on the dollar. The wedding? It was just a grand farewell to the old family place before they bulldozed it to build their glass and steel modernist mansion. The dates didn't lie. This scheme had been in motion for months. I had been played like a fiddle, first by my own husband and now by his sister, all while I was smiling politely and serving coffee to the caterers for their damn wedding. I was sitting on the floor of the office, surrounded by a sea of paper that documented my own foolishness. How had I missed it all? The frequent business trips John took, the hushed phone calls he'd take in the bathroom, the bank statements he always made sure I never saw. I had actively chosen to ignore the warning signs because it was easier, because I trusted him, because I loved him. Hot tears streamed down my face as the cold, hard reality finally crashed down on me. I had 48 hours to come up with nearly $500,000, or I would lose everything. And to make it all worse, the very woman plotting to take my home would be arriving tomorrow to finalize the plans for her fairy tale wedding. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with every passing second. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Time was running out. I spent the entire night cycling through my phone's contact list, calling every financial institution I could find, from the big national banks to the sketchy online lenders that promise instant approval. The conversation was always the same, only the politely disinterested voice on the other end of the line changed. "Unfortunately, ma'am, with this credit history," my credit history, until yesterday, I didn't even know I had a problem with it. But surprise, it turned out John had also used my name on a few of those loans. "Your husband had power of attorney to sign on your behalf," a slightly more sympathetic manager at a Bank of America branch explained. "It's quite common in marriages. Do you recall signing the authorization?" I swallowed hard. Of course I did. I signed whatever John slid in front of me, always with his reassuring smile and his classic line, "It's just boring paperwork, honey. Trust me." Trust. What a joke that word had become. For our entire marriage, John had been protecting me from the tedious burden of finances. His mantra was, "You focus on making our house a home, I'll handle the numbers." In reality, what he was doing was intentionally keeping me in the dark, forging my life away on documents I never even read. Driven by desperation, I went to a jeweler at Phipps Plaza. Onto the pristine glass counter, I placed my engagement ring, a pair of diamond earrings, and the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. The appraiser, an older gentleman with small glasses perched on the end of his nose, inspected each piece with a jeweler's loupe, making little and ah sounds while I stood there, sweating with anxiety. "I can offer you $28,000 for the lot," he finally announced. $28,000? The collection John had assured me was worth a small fortune would barely cover a down payment on a used car. "I'm afraid these pearls are cultured, not natural," he explained, almost pityingly. "And this diamond, well, the clarity is significantly compromised." I walked out of that store clutching a pathetic check and a far more painful truth. Even the tokens of his love were worth less than he claimed. My last hope was my supposed best friend, Jessica. If anyone could lend me the money, she could, right? But the moment I explained my situation, I saw a subtle shift in her expression. "Oh, Maddie, that's just awful. I'd love to help, darling, but we just sank every last penny into expanding the beach house," which was wealthy speak for, "I don't give loans to people who are going under." Our friendship, it appeared, also had compromised clarity. Victoria arrived shortly after noon, marshalling an army of decorators like a 5-star general. I watched from inside the house as she pointed to different spots in the yard. Guest tables here, the main bar over there, and the dance floor right by the deck. My yard, the one where I had planted every single flower, the place where John had proposed to me under the sprawling magnolia tree, was being carved up into stations for a party that would celebrate my utter ruin. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. "Maddie, there you are," Victoria chirped when I finally stepped outside. Her tone instantly switched from battlefield commander to sickeningly sweet. "What do you think of the arrangements? White orchids and blue hydrangeas to match the view of the lake." Her words were directed at me, but her eyes were darting around, following the decorators to ensure every last detail was executed to perfection. It was morbidly fascinating how she could maintain 2 personalities at once, the charming Victoria for her audience and the calculating one I was only now beginning to understand. "Why are you doing this?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Victoria blinked, feigning confusion for a moment. Then she smiled, that rehearsed smile she probably practiced in the mirror. "Doing what, sweetie? The wedding? Well, when you find the right man." I shook my head, cutting through the performance. "No. Why here? Why at my house? Why now, when you know I'm about to lose it?" For a split second, her smile flickered like a faulty light bulb. Then, seeing we were alone, her entire demeanor shifted. The mask dropped. "Maddie, darling, you really are as naive as John always said." Her voice was now a low, sharp whisper. "We were making plans for this property while you were busy picking out curtains. John never appreciated what this place was. He saw an old house. Harrison and I see the potential for a residence worthy of Architectural Digest." She casually adjusted a flower in the nearest arrangement. "And as for the timing, well, business is business. Why would we build from the ground up when we can acquire it for a fraction of the price after the foreclosure? You should be thanking me. I'm giving this place one last memorable party before the demolition crew arrives." I left that conversation on autopilot, driving aimlessly along the shoreline, Victoria's venomous words echoing in my head. The winding road that hugged the lake usually calmed me, but today every curve seemed to pull me deeper into despair. As I took one of the sharper turns, where a guardrail was dented from some long-forgotten accident, I nearly lost control of the car. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering against my ribs, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. That's when I saw it. Another car pulled over on the shoulder, its hood up. A red Honda Civic, with a plume of smoke rising from the engine. "Need a hand?" I called out automatically as I pulled over, not really thinking about what I was doing. The woman leaning over the engine looked up, her face smudged with grease, her curly hair pulled back in a messy bun. It took me a second to place her. "Elena? Elena Vasquez?" She squinted, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Maddie Reed? Oh my God, it's been ages." Elena had been a client of mine about 5 years ago, back when I still had my interior design business, before John insisted my hobby was taking up too much of our family time. "This car is going to be the death of me," Elena sighed, wiping her greasy hands on an already filthy rag. "It's overheated again. I'm on my way to a court hearing, and now I'm definitely going to be late." It was only then that I noticed her leather briefcase and the formal blazer she was wearing, a stark contrast to the smudge of grease on her forehead. "A court hearing? You're a lawyer." "I specialize in real estate law and financial fraud cases mostly." A switch flipped in my brain. Real estate law, financial fraud. It felt as if the universe had just airdropped a guardian angel, one with a very, very specific skill set. "I can give you a ride," I offered, the words rushing out. "And maybe you could give me some advice? I'm dealing with a problem that sounds like it's right up your alley." Elena gave me a long, curious look, glanced back at her smoking car, and then shrugged. "Well, it doesn't look like I have much of a choice, do I?" As she grabbed her briefcase from the passenger seat, a strange feeling blossomed in my chest. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. Like that sensation when you're sinking and your fingertips finally brush against something solid. I was still drowning, but maybe, just maybe, I'd found a life raft. Elena's office was nothing like I'd pictured. There was no marble, no dark mahogany, no ostentatious law school diplomas on the walls. Instead, it was a small, unassuming space in a midtown commercial building filled with an abundance of plants, bookshelves overflowing with legal texts, and a well-worn sofa in the corner. "Sorry about the mess," she said, clearing a stack of files from a chair so I could sit. "I save on the overhead so I can charge less for the clients who really need the help." There was something deeply comforting about the organized chaos, a complete lack of pretense that paradoxically impressed me more than any fancy corner office ever could. "Okay, so let me get this straight," she said, after I had laid out the whole sordid story, spreading the documents I'd brought across her already cluttered desk. "Your husband took out a mortgage against the house without your explicit knowledge, using a power of attorney you signed. The foreclosure auction is in less than 48 hours, and your sister-in-law, who co-signed on the loans, is planning to swoop in and buy the property for pennies on the dollar afterward." She pushed her red-framed glasses up the bridge of her nose, her eyes scanning one document after another. "And the cherry on top is that her wedding is happening at your house tomorrow." Wow, that's something out of a movie. "Is there any way out of this?" I asked, hating the desperate quaver in my own voice. Elena chewed on her lip, deep in thought. "Possibly. There are some irregularities in these loan documents. This signature here, for instance, is it actually yours?" She pointed to a scrawl that vaguely resembled my handwriting but was subtly different. "No, I mean, it's close, but I didn't sign that." Elena nodded, scribbling a quick note. "I thought so. We can file for an emergency injunction, arguing fraudulent conveyance. It won't erase the debt, but it could buy us some time." "Time is the one thing I don't have," I pointed out bitterly. Elena looked at me over her glasses, her expression softening. "You know, I've sat on that side of the desk before," she said, gesturing to where I was sitting. "My ex-husband did something very similar. We lost everything. It's why I changed careers. I was an accountant, and I went to law school specifically to understand how I'd been so thoroughly cheated and to help others avoid it." She reached out and placed a hand on my arm. "I won't lie to you, Maddie. This is an uphill battle. The system is built to favor the banks and people with deep pockets like your future brother-in-law, but it's not impossible." The next morning delivered our first major blow. "The judge denied the injunction," Elena explained over the phone, the frustration sharp in her voice. "Without more concrete proof of forgery, he ruled that the power of attorney you signed is legally binding for all transactions." I closed my eyes, the full weight of reality pressing down on me. Less than 24 hours until the wedding. Less than 36 until I lost my home. And our one legal shield had just been shattered. "So what now?" I whispered, watching from the window as a catering crew erected massive white tents on my lawn, like vultures gathering for a funeral. I had barely hung up when a black BMW 7 Series purred up the driveway, parking next to the delivery trucks. Harrison Montgomery III emerged, dressed in a flawless suit and sporting the kind of year-round tan that only comes with extreme wealth. We had never been formally introduced, only exchanged polite nods at family events where he was simply Victoria's friend. Now I understood why they'd kept their relationship under wraps for so long. It wasn't a romance, it was a business merger. Mrs. "Read," he began, with a practiced smile and the smooth, condescending tone executives use when they believe they're bestowing a great favor upon a lesser being. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I wanted to discuss a proposal that might be of interest to you." I invited him in, acting on some deeply ingrained reflex of Southern politeness. Inside, he surveyed the living room, his gaze lingering on the lake view as if he were assessing a piece of merchandise. "Beautiful property. It has character, though it will require significant modernization, of course." I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from retorting that the smallest room in this house had more character than his entire spray-tanned body. Harrison got straight to the point. He wanted to buy the house, right now, before the foreclosure. He offered to pay off the bank debt in full and give me an additional $100,000 for your trouble. It was a tempting offer, a terribly tempting one. A clean break, a way out of this nightmare with some cash in my pocket. As I was considering it, I saw a familiar car pull up outside, Elena's red Honda, apparently back in working order. And right behind her, arriving in a separate car, was Victoria. The look that passed between Harrison and Victoria when they saw each other, that flash of surprise and barely concealed panic, was like an X-ray of the entire scheme. Harrison wasn't here out of the goodness of his heart. He was here to shut me up and close the deal before I could dig up any more dirt. "They've pushed up the foreclosure," I explained to Elena and Samuel, the gardener who had worked for my family for decades. We were gathered in my kitchen, which had become a makeshift war room. "The bank just called. The eviction notice could be served as early as tomorrow afternoon, right after the wedding." Samuel shook his head, his face a mask of indignation. "Mrs. Maddie, this isn't right. This house has been in your family for generations." Elena was frantically flipping through law books on my kitchen island, searching for any precedent, any loophole we had missed. "That Victoria, she tried to bribe me," Samuel revealed suddenly, the shame clear on his sun-wrinkled face. "She offered me a bonus if I told her what you were up to, if you had any plans to disrupt the wedding." I stared at him, stunned. "And you didn't take it?" He drew himself up, offended by the very question. "I worked for your grandfather, and then for your father. They were men of their word. That Victoria, she's not cut from the same cloth." A lump formed in my throat. In a world full of betrayal, to find such profound loyalty in the most unexpected of places felt like a glass of cold water in the desert. "We can't legally stop the foreclosure," Elena concluded, snapping a thick law book shut with a sigh of frustration. "But maybe we can stall." Samuel, who had been staring out the window at the wedding preparations, turned around slowly. "You know, Mrs. Maddie, whenever a big hurricane was forecast, your grandfather used to board this place up tight. He'd lock down every single access point to the deck and the gardens." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "If every single entrance was secured tomorrow morning." Elena's eyes lit up, immediately grasping the implication. "Technically, you are still the legal owner until that eviction notice is served. You have every right to control who comes and goes from your property." I looked from one to the other, the seed of an idea sprouting and twisting into a tornado in my mind. This wasn't just about stopping a wedding or getting petty revenge on Victoria and Harrison. This was about engineering a situation so chaotic, so publicly humiliating, that they would be forced to the negotiating table on my terms. "We'd have to change every lock tonight," I murmured, my mind already racing through the logistics. "And we'll need cameras and an outdoor sound system." A grin spread across Samuel's face, a mischievous look I'd never seen before. "I know a locksmith who works 24/7. He's my cousin's nephew," Elena added, a determined glint in her eyes. "And we need to document everything. Every call, every text, every trespass attempt. Evidence is our ammunition." For the first time in 2 days, a feeling other than pure dread washed over me, the electric thrill of a counteroffensive taking shape. The next 24 hours were a clandestine operation disguised as last-minute wedding prep. Samuel, who had revealed a hidden talent as a master strategist, mapped out every single point of entry to the property. There were 7 in total, including the small, long-forgotten cellar door. "We missed just one, and the whole plan goes down the drain," he explained, making notes on a piece of tracing paper laid over the house's blueprints. It was surreal, watching my gentle gardener, a man who usually only spoke of planting seasons, suddenly transform into a character from a spy movie. The locksmith, who was in fact Samuel's cousin's nephew, arrived at 8 p.m., carrying a tool case that looked like it weighed a ton. "I can get 'em all changed by midnight, but it'll cost you double," he said, all business. Money was the one thing I didn't have, but Elena, to my surprise, fronted the cash. "Consider it an investment in our case," she said with a wink. Meanwhile, we discreetly installed a series of small, wireless cameras at strategic vantage points and concealed outdoor speakers among the azalea bushes. The entire time, my heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest every time a car drove by or a phone rang. The most nerve-wracking moment came when Victoria showed up unannounced for a final walkthrough. I had to intercept her on the front porch, forcing myself to gush about flower arrangements as if I could care less about flowers at that moment, while Samuel and the locksmith scrambled to hide themselves and their tools in the basement. "You seem different," Victoria remarked, studying me with those hawk-like eyes. "More upbeat? I thought you'd be devastated about the bank situation." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "I'm trying to look on the bright side. Maybe a fresh start is exactly what I need." My apparent surrender seemed to satisfy her, which only fueled my resolve. By the time everyone had left and the locksmith had finished his work, it was past 1 in the morning. I was bone-tired, but buzzing with a strange, nervous energy. We tested every new lock, every camera feed, and the sound system. "Tomorrow, you stay in the boathouse," Elena instructed, referring to the small structure on the other side of the property that had a perfect, unobstructed view of the main garden. "From there, you can control everything without being seen." Before she left, she took my hands in hers. "Are you sure about this, Maddie? It's not too late to back out." I thought about all the lies, the manipulation, the cold way I had been treated as a disposable pawn in their game. "Absolutely," I replied. Though later that night, staring at my bedroom ceiling, I dreamt of John, his ghost, asking if I really had the courage to see this through to the end. The sunrise over Lake Lanier usually filled me with a sense of peace, but on this particular morning, as I watched the first golden rays dance across the water, all I felt was a cold, hard resolve. I had slept for 2 hours at most, jolted awake by every creak and groan of the house. Now, with a cup of strong black coffee turning in my empty stomach, I watched from the window as the first of the vendors arrived. A floral delivery van, the catering crew, the sound technicians. One by one, they pulled up to the main entrance, looking confused as they tried doors that would no longer open. As I watched the chaos begin to mount, memories flooded my thoughts. My dad teaching me to swim in that very water. My mom in the kitchen, the scent of her apple pies filling the entire house. The first time John brought me here, a nervous wreck about meeting my grandparents. Our own wedding reception, so much smaller and more intimate than the spectacle Victoria had planned. And then, the harder moments, my grandparents' funerals, the long nights spent caring for John when he first got sick, the ever-widening silences between us in those final years. This house had seen it all. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was the keeper of my entire life story. At 8 a.m. sharp, my phone began to vibrate off the hook. First, it was the catering manager, then the florist, then Victoria herself, her voice a mask of controlled annoyance that quickly frayed into hysteria with each unanswered call. "Maddie, what the hell is going on? No one can get in. Call me back immediately." The voicemails grew more and more desperate, and I'll admit, a small, shameful part of me savored every second of her rising panic. For once, someone else was getting a taste of their own medicine. As planned, I moved into the boathouse before 9, taking only the essentials: my laptop to monitor the cameras, my phone, the folder containing all the incriminating documents, and, for reasons I couldn't quite explain, the framed photo of my grandparents. From its panoramic windows, I had a perfect view of the garden and the deck, now crowded with people gesturing wildly into their phones. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt like I had some semblance of power over my own life. It was an intoxicating feeling, but a terrifying one, too. What would be left when the dust settled? Was I throwing away my last chance to walk away from this with any dignity? Harrison arrived just after 10, and from his tense, rigid body language, I could tell the perfect couple was having their first major fight. What a shame. By noon, the situation had escalated from confusion to full-blown chaos. The first guests began to arrive, not to the elegant lakeside reception they were promised, but to a scene of utter confusion. They were met with frustrated vendors, half-assembled decorations, and nowhere to sit but a few scattered garden chairs. I watched from my monitor as uncles and cousins I hadn't seen in years milled about, looking deeply uncomfortable in their formal wear under the oppressive Georgia humidity. Elderly women fanned themselves with their lavish invitations while men in suits loosened their ties. A part of me felt a pang of guilt. They were just innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. I was on the verge of calling the whole thing off when my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. Final notice, foreclosure auction. My hands trembled as I opened it. They had moved the auction up again, this time to 5 p.m. today. That was it. That was the final push. Right on cue, Elena arrived. Dressed elegantly in a discreet blue dress and sunglasses, she slipped through the disgruntled crowd like she belonged there, an operative infiltrating the party that wasn't. She moved between groups, picking up snippets of conversation and feeding me updates via text. Victoria is on the verge of a complete meltdown. Harrison is trying to keep up appearances, but is clearly furious. Half the guests are already talking about calling an Uber. It's now or never, Maddie. My finger hovered over the icon that would activate the outdoor sound system. Once I pressed it, there was no going back. I took a deep breath, thinking of the recording I had of my conversation with Victoria, the one where she gloated about her entire scheme. Broadcasting that to her entire social circle would be the nuclear option. It would obliterate her reputation and almost certainly her relationship with Harrison. Was it cruel? Yes. More cruel than plotting to make me homeless while throwing a party on my property? That was debatable. The moral dilemma was consuming me when an unexpected sight solidified my resolve. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, arriving on the arm of her husband. Aunt Carol, who practically raised me after my parents died, who sewed my prom dress by hand, who held me and sobbed with me at John's funeral. She had no idea. None of my family did. Victoria had sent them invitations, as if everything was perfect, as if I were a happy participant. My finger hit the button, almost of its own accord. A sharp burst of feedback made everyone in the garden jump. And then, my recorded voice filled the air, followed by Victoria's, sharp and unmistakable. Maddie, darling, you really are as naive as John always said. We were making plans for this property while you were busy picking out curtains. Every word of her treachery, every detail of the plan to buy the house out of foreclosure, every sneering insult about the very people standing there, we only invited half of them for the wedding gifts anyway, was amplified for all to hear. Through the camera feed, I saw Victoria freeze in the middle of the lawn. Her face cycled through an astonishing range of emotions: shock, horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated fury. A few feet away, Harrison slowly turned to face her, his socialite mask replaced by the cold, hard expression of a CEO assessing a catastrophic loss. I have never seen such a well-dressed group of people dissolve into a frantic swarm so quickly. It was like watching a National Geographic special on herd behavior, only with guests in Prada and Armani. Cliques formed instantly. Some huddled around Victoria, others gravitated toward Harrison, but most were just trying to process what the hell was happening. My Aunt Carol looked utterly bewildered, scanning the crowd as if expecting me to materialize and explain everything. The cameras captured it all: Victoria's complete breakdown of composure, Harrison strategically distancing himself, and guests pulling out their phones to document the social train wreck of the year. "This is insane! It's a setup!" Victoria shrieked, her shrill voice easily picked up by the hidden microphones. She tried to approach Harrison, but he took a step back as if she were contagious. "Harry, you don't believe this, do you? Maddie obviously doctored that recording." But his face said it all. That particular blend of disgust and detached calculation a businessman makes when he realizes he's made a very, very bad investment. The irony was almost poetic. Victoria, the master manipulator, now screaming about being manipulated. The defining moment came when a small child, whose son he was I have no idea, toddled up to Victoria, drawn by the commotion. "Auntie Vicky is crying," he observed, reaching out a small hand to touch her dress. "Get away from me," she screeched, shoving the little boy harder than necessary. He stumbled backward and fell onto the grass, his lip trembling for a shocked second before he burst into tears. The boy's mother rushed to scoop him up, shooting Victoria a look that could freeze hell over. That single ugly moment revealed more about the real Victoria than the entire recording ever could. I was so engrossed in the drama unfolding on screen that I almost missed Elena giving me a discreet wave from the edge of the garden. It was the prearranged signal. It was time. My heart started hammering a mile a minute. It was one thing to orchestrate this from a distance. It was another thing entirely to walk into the chaos I had created. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down the simple but dignified dress I had chosen. No victim playing, no melodrama, and stepped out of the boathouse. As I began to walk toward the garden, I saw Harrison notice me first, his calculating eyes narrowing. Then Victoria, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. And finally, my Aunt Carol, her confusion melting into understanding, and then into something that looked like cautious pride. It was time for the final showdown. And strangely, I wasn't afraid anymore. You know that deafening silence in movies right before the hero makes their dramatic entrance? That's exactly what happened. I swear you could hear the cicadas buzzing in the trees as I started across the lawn. Guests started whispering, pointing not so subtly in my direction. "That's her! The owner of the house! John's widow!" That last one made me mentally roll my eyes. I was his widow, not some forgotten footnote. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I do apologize for the inconvenience with the locked doors. It seems there's been a misunderstanding." Victoria stalked toward me, her face contorted in a rage so intense her Botox couldn't contain it. "You psycho bitch! What do you think you're doing?" Harrison, ever the calculating businessman, placed a restraining hand on her arm, not out of concern for her, but to manage the public relations disaster unfolding before his eyes. "What am I doing?" I repeated calmly, my gaze sweeping across the guests who now formed a perfect circle around us, like spectators at a prize fight. "I'm preventing my home. The home my grandparents built, the home I grew up in, and the home that is still, for the moment, legally mine, from being used to celebrate the union of two people who conspired to steal it from me." I opened the folder I was carrying, pulling out the documents Elena had so meticulously organized. "I have evidence right here that Victoria, as the guarantor on my late husband's loans, was aware of his dire financial situation long before he passed away, and that she and her fiancé conspired to acquire this property for pennies on the dollar after the foreclosure." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harrison stepped forward, that polished, toothpaste commercial smile automatically snapping into place. "Mrs. Reed, I understand you're upset with the circumstances, but turning a private family matter into a public circus doesn't help anyone. Why don't we step inside and discuss this? I'm certain we can come to a reasonable arrangement." Translation: "Let's hide this embarrassing mess from my influential guests and buy your silence later." But I was far past the point of accepting scraps from their table. "A reasonable arrangement?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You mean like the one you offered me yesterday? Pay off the debt and toss me $100,000 for a property that's worth 5 times that?" I smiled, feeling a surge of confidence I didn't know I possessed. "No, Mr. Montgomery. The time for backroom deals is over. If you want this house so badly, you will pay its full fair market value. And as for you, Victoria," I turned to my sister-in-law, who looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. "Perhaps you'd care to explain to your guests why you thought it was appropriate to celebrate your wedding at the very home you helped wrench away from your own family." The next 2 hours were a spectacle straight out of a reality TV show. There was a mass exodus of guests, some of whom paused to take discreet selfies with the unfolding drama in the background. Seriously, people? The vendors began breaking down their setups in a hurry. Apparently, no one wanted their brand associated with the Lake Lanier wedding disaster, as it was already being dubbed in group texts. Victoria had to be practically dragged away from me by her bridesmaids, screaming an impressive and surprisingly creative string of curses I didn't even know she knew. Mental note: my former sister-in-law had a remarkably colorful vocabulary for someone so obsessed with appearances. Harrison, on the other hand, revealed his true nature as a shark. While Victoria was a vortex of raw, chaotic emotion, he was already on his phone, issuing clipped commands, his cold eyes calculating his losses and planning his next move. At one point, I saw him look back at the house, not with anger, but with that same assessing, appraising gaze from before. It dawned on me then that for him, this was merely a setback, a failed acquisition. Men like Harrison Montgomery III don't get to the top by accepting defeat. A shiver went down my spine as I realized I may have won the battle, but the war was far from over. Aunt Carol found me as the last of the crowd began to thin. "Oh, Maddie, honey, why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her warm hands clutching mine. "I thought this was all settled, that you were happy to have the wedding here." I saw then just how masterful Victoria's manipulation had been, how she had carefully firewalled my personal life from my financial one. I didn't want to worry anyone, I lied, at least partially. The whole truth, that I was paralyzed by the shame of having been so naive, so easily fooled, was still too difficult to admit, even to her. Elena walked up as I watched the last of the cars pull away. "Impressive," she commented, a small, wry smile on her lips. "You have a future in theater, you know." I let out a laugh that sounded more like a choked sob. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. "What happens now?" I asked, gesturing to the wreckage of my garden. Trampled flowers, overturned chairs, and half-empty glasses of abandoned champagne littered the lawn. Elena checked her watch. "Now we wait. A sheriff's deputy could arrive with the eviction papers any minute. But," she gave me a mysterious smile, "I think we bought ourselves more than just a little time today." The following morning brought the emotional hangover I'd been expecting, complete with a splitting headache from lack of sleep. Incredibly, the sheriff's deputy never showed up yesterday. "The chaos probably delayed the paperwork," Elena explained over the phone, "but don't get comfortable. They're still coming." She had barely finished her sentence when my doorbell rang. My heart leaped into my throat until I opened the door to a courier, not an officer. He held out an elegant cream-colored envelope. "Delivery for Madison Reed." Inside was an invitation, no, a summons, printed on heavy, expensive cardstock, bearing the logo of a prestigious Atlanta law firm. Victoria Reed versus Madison Reed, lawsuit for defamation, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Attached was a letter detailing how I had maliciously sabotaged a private family event and caused irreparable harm to the personal and professional reputation of my dear former sister-in-law. The damages they were seeking were astronomical, clearly designed to bury me under a mountain of legal debt. My hands shook as I immediately called Elena. "She's suing me? After everything she did?" "It was to be expected," Elena sighed, sounding completely unsurprised. "It's a classic intimidation tactic. It's called a slap suit. She has the resources to hire the most expensive lawyers in the state, and she knows you don't." I closed my eyes, the familiar feeling of defeat creeping back in. Even with the truth on my side, I was outgunned. The legal system favors those who can afford to play the long game. "There's something else," Elena continued, her tone shifting. "Harrison's lawyers are already filing motions to have our recordings deemed inadmissible. Georgia is a one-party consent state, so we're on solid ground, but they're going to argue you recorded her with malicious intent, creating a legal gray area. They'll tie us up in court for months just arguing over this one piece of evidence." The doorbell rang again. This time, it was him. Harrison Montgomery III, standing alone. He was wearing a suit that was, if possible, even more immaculate than yesterday's. "May I have a word?" he asked, with the practiced cordiality of a corporate predator. I let him in, more out of morbid curiosity than politeness. He glanced around the chaotic living room, taking in the debris from the failed wedding preparations. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, declining the coffee I offered out of habit. "I want to buy this property. Fair market price, determined by a neutral third-party appraiser. You walk away with enough money to start over fresh, I get what I want, and we all move on with our lives." He paused for calculated effect. "In exchange, Victoria drops the lawsuit." I stared at him, trying to process the whiplash. The offer was tempting, so incredibly tempting. A clean exit from this nightmare with a substantial amount of money, no more legal battles, no more Harrison and Victoria. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. His smile vanished, replaced by a chillingly flat expression. "Then we will use every legal and financial resource at our disposal to drag this out. The defamation suit is only the beginning. We will bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left to fight with. The choice is yours, Mrs. Reed. I can drag this out for years, Maddie. Years that, financially speaking, you don't have." It wasn't a veiled threat, it was a promise. And the worst part? He was right. In a legal war of attrition, I was completely outmatched. But that's when I noticed something in his expression as he looked past me, out the window at the lake. It wasn't just greed or ambition, it was genuine admiration. "You really love this place, don't you?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. For the first time, Harrison Montgomery III looked momentarily thrown. "It is an exceptional investment," he replied, quickly snapping back into his corporate persona. "He's bluffing," Elena insisted when we met later that afternoon to go over Harrison's proposal. We were back at the same midtown coffee shop where we'd first met, a lifetime ago, or so it felt. "If you take his deal now, you're negotiating from a position of weakness. He knows it, and that's why he's applying pressure." She was chewing on the end of her pen, a habit I'd come to recognize as her deep thinking mode. "What he doesn't know is that I found more than just a few irregularities. John and Victoria forged your signature on at least 3 key financial affidavits. But the judge is already trying to block our evidence," I countered, stirring my now cold latte distractedly. Elena flashed that determined grin I was starting to know well, the smile of someone who simply doesn't accept defeat. "Yes, the recordings. But this is different. This is a job for a forensic handwriting analyst. We can prove, scientifically, that you were not the one who signed those papers." She opened her briefcase, showing me a preliminary report. "And there's more. I did some digging. Victoria has a pattern. I found 3 other properties over the last 5 years, all in the Atlanta area. Same MO every time. Find a vulnerable owner, co-sign on loans to build trust, wait for the foreclosure, and then swoop in to buy the property for a song from the bank." The weeks that followed were a dizzying roller coaster of legal motions and emotional whiplash. Realizing we weren't going to roll over, Harrison doubled down. The defamation lawsuit was amended to include invasion of privacy and other creatively fabricated charges. Victoria gave tearful interviews to society blogs, painting herself as the tragic victim of a grief-stricken and unstable sister-in-law. But Elena was just as busy, methodically building our case, tracking down other victims of Victoria's schemes, and putting legal pressure on the bank to investigate the forgeries. It was a high-stakes chess match where every move we made was met with an even more aggressive counter. The turning point came from a place we never expected. Harrison, growing tired of Victoria's constant drama and increasingly worried about the damage to his own pristine reputation, began to pull away. First, he canceled their non-refundable honeymoon to Bora Bora. Then, he was spotted having dinner at Bone's Steakhouse with another woman. Strictly business, of course. The final straw, however, was when he discovered through Elena's discovery process that Victoria had been lying to him about other investments they'd made together. The news reached me via the neighborhood's official gossip chain. Harrison and Victoria had engaged in a screaming match of epic proportions at that same restaurant, culminating in her throwing a glass of Cabernet all over his custom-made white Tom Ford suit. The very next day, he officially withdrew all financial backing for her lawsuits against me. The bank, now terrified of the negative press and facing mounting evidence of wire fraud, suddenly became very agreeable to renegotiating our terms. It wasn't a clean slate. I still had a considerable debt to repay, but I secured a realistic timeline and a payment plan that would allow me to keep my home. As I signed the final stack of papers, with Elena beside me scrutinizing every last comma, I felt a strange mix of profound relief and disbelief. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," I confessed as we walked out of the bank building. Elena smiled, pushing her glasses up her nose. Actually, you pulled it off. The moment you decided to fight back instead of accepting their version of reality. I felt myself flush at the compliment, but her words resonated deep inside me. Maybe the old Maddie wouldn't have fought back. But this new version of me? She didn't go down that easily. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't. Yes, it had acquired an official title in the local rumor mill. I sat on my porch, surrounded by a new set of papers. Blueprints, contractor bids, financial projections. Everything I needed to transform a section of the property into a boutique inn. The idea had come to me during one long, sleepless night. If this lakefront view was so valuable that people would try to steal it, why not make it pay for itself? The Lanier Landing Inn had a nice ring to it, didn't it? These numbers are looking very solid, commented Michael Bradley, a commercial loan officer from a local bank who was a world away from the cold, dismissive voices I'd dealt with before. He had salt and pepper hair and wore ties with little sailboats on them, which I took as a good omen for a lakeside venture. By focusing the renovation on the guest cottage and the annex, you maintain the privacy of the main house while still monetizing the asset. Monetizing. It was a word I never thought I'd associate with my ancestral home. But desperate times called for innovative measures, and I was done with just surviving. I was ready to thrive. Elena, who was now far more than just my lawyer, scanned the business plan we had drafted together. You should apply for that Georgia Tourism and Hospitality grant for sustainable development, she suggested, red ink magically circling sections that needed work. She had an annoying but invaluable knack for finding the weak spots in any plan. And make sure you write environmental protection clauses into the landscape architect's contract. This lake is a protected watershed. I smiled at my new friend, marveling at life's funny way of putting the exact people you need in your path at the most unexpected times. Samuel came out onto the porch carrying a tray with tall glasses of iced tea and a fresh-baked peach cobbler that should have been declared a state treasure. Since the incident, as he called it, Samuel had morphed from gardener to a sort of de facto property manager, overseeing the initial repairs with a critical eye that no high-priced interior designer could match. The lumber company called, Mrs. Maddie. The new cedar for the decks arrives next week. He beamed, a genuine smile that lit up his weathered face. Your grandfather would be so proud. He always said this house needed more people, more life in it. I swallowed the lump that instantly formed in my throat. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Okay, sky blue or navy for the curtains in Cottage 3, I asked Elena as we walked through the property, now a neatly organized construction site. She peered at me over her glasses with a look that said, "Are you seriously asking me this?" "Maddie, I'm a lawyer, not a decorator. Remember?" I felt my cheeks flush because she was right. Before John, before I poured all my energy into becoming the perfect wife, I had a great eye for design. It was strange, feeling those old skills waking up again, like dormant muscles finally being stretched after a long time. The construction on the inn moved forward, slowly transforming the eastern wing of the property into 5 cozy, self-contained cottages, each with a stunning view of the lake. The main house remained my private residence, though the ground floor was being converted into a small restaurant that would serve breakfast and dinner to our guests. Samuel, who I had officially promoted to operations manager, with a proper salary and benefits, was overseeing the hiring of our first staff members, mostly people from the local community. It was important to me that this new chapter didn't just benefit me, but also the town that my family had called home for generations. Not every relationship survived the storm, of course. Half of John's family still wasn't speaking to me, having fully bought into Victoria's narrative of the events. Jessica, my former best friend, sent a single generic text. We should totally do lunch sometime. That we both knew was just an empty pleasantry. But to my surprise, new and stronger connections bloomed from the ashes. Aunt Carol started showing up every week with a casserole and a mountain of unsolicited advice on running a business. Suddenly, a woman who had never worked a day in her life was an expert in hotel management. Elena, my emergency lawyer, had become such a close friend that we now had a standing weekly date for wine and bad 80s movies. Sometimes late at night when the sounds of construction had gone silent, I'd find myself thinking about John. about the man I loved, the web of lies we built together, and the parts of him I never truly knew. On one of those nights, I found his old memory box in the attic, filled with concert stubs, cards I'd given him, and photos of us from happier times. I cried for hours, not just for the loss of him, but for the loss of the Maddie who existed before all the betrayal. That naive, overly trusting version of me was gone forever. In her place was someone more cautious, yes, but also someone stronger and far more resolute. Someone who would never again let another person define her worth or dictate her future. 48 hours. That's the deadline I was given to save my home, and in the process, I ended up saving myself. So, that's my story. Locked doors, betrayals, and nearly $500,000 on the line. Looking back on it now, from the porch of my successful inn, I sometimes wonder if I went too far. Was locking everyone out on the wedding day a cruel move? Probably. Was it justified? Well, I'll leave that up to you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have just accepted it, walked away with your dignity, and started from scratch? Or would you have fought back with every weapon at your disposal, no matter how unconventional, like I did? Maybe you have a similar story, that moment you had to choose between being the nice guy and fighting for what's yours. Let me know in the comments. After all, the line between revenge and justice is often as thin as the paper on those golden wedding invitations Victoria was so proud to hand out. The real question is, which side of that line would you have been on?